They're delusionally hoping that they can build something better. And again, that's left for you to decide.
They could be inadvertently creating like a politburo of a medium-sized Soviet city, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Very few people want to build a tyrannical society. The worst evil comes from people who think they're doing good.
Okay, welcome everyone. Here with me is a very special guest. We are in the UK where it's hot, hot like a polar bear's curry recipe. Right, William? Is that right?
That's you took the words right out of my mouth.
Is it hot in Edinburgh, by the way?
Edinburgh, Edinburgh. It is, yeah, it's hot for Scottish standards. I think it's probably about 5 degrees cooler here than it will be in like the south of England. I was at a work thing earlier and people were putting sun cream on, so yeah, take that as you will.
Yeah, well, but they're white people, so they're gonna be putting that on in the winter too.
Very white, the whitest of white.
So, William Jennings Chalk, you're an author. You're many other things too. We can talk about that, but you've written this, I think, very thought-provoking 38 pages that Mr. Amazon brought me a couple of days ago, and I have a lot to say about it. But can we start with just the novella as a thing?
Yes.
38 page. I'd say a short story is a different thing, right? Because that's like 8 to 12 pages. Novella is like a whole new forgotten art form.
Yeah, I'm slowly moving up from article to short story to novella and increasing the size gradually. But yeah, basically, I had a story that I wanted to tell and wrote it out, and that's sort of roughly how long it was. And it felt too long to call it a short story, I guess. So yeah, novella, I think, is the most appropriate way of describing it.
It's a bit more pretentious and British as well. Short story
Sure.
sounds very crude.
Yeah, sure. You can say that too.
Is it that any of this have tactic or strategy of making shorter stuff? Does it? And is it some kind of reaction to the modern attention span?
Oh, you credit me with too much foresight, Danny. No, I don't think so. I mean, it might be a reaction of my modern attention span, and I have had to build it up. I think it's, what is it? I mean, it's difficult to like hold a story in place consistently the longer it is, I think, right? Um, and so this story was a lot longer, and then it just, it got really cut down in the editing process. But yeah, no, I mean, I would say that I'm building up my own ability to tell longer stories slowly. But I hope, given that it is short, that it's easily readable.
Yeah, a bit about the topic. It's actually, I mean, I guess you're in luck in the sense that I might actually have some intelligence things to say. I don't know if you're a listener or not, but I recently recommended to the listeners the Gulag Archipelago, which I finally read.
Okay.
Alexander
Mm,
Solzhenitsyn.
sure.
And right after that, I think yours is, I wouldn't say yours is a commentary on communism per se, but the theme, let's just say they're in the same swimming pool, maybe at opposite ends, like the utopian society, maybe a bit of Thomas More
Mm,
commentary in there as well, would you say?
mm. It's interesting that that's what you get from it, to be honest. I mean, you're definitely right in that the most of the plot exists in a sort of fictional utopian society where they're trying to work out how to dispense justice fairly, and that's obviously gonna evoke like different emotions from different people. But I mean, the main influence is an Ursula Le Guin short story, "The Ones Who Walk Away from Amelis." I don't know if you've read that before.
No, but because it's credited as the inspiration to this, and I really, really like this, by the way, so I'm gonna have to read that one too.
Thank you.
Probably is it the wrong order?
Well, maybe, but that's fine. So, the Ursula Le Guin story is a short story from 1975 where she imagines a fictional utopia that is great in every way and everyone's happy, except that all the happiness and joy of the city is dependent on the suffering, imprisonment, and torture of a small child. Um, and you cannot have one without the other. And the young folk, as they are growing up in the city, they're taken to visit the child so they can be aware of where their happiness comes from. And most learn to live with it, but some don't. And the ones who don't are the walk away, and they're the ones who walk away from Omelas.
I think we'd all take that trade off, right? Having not read this one yet, I mean hers, we'd all take that trade for utopia. You know, utilitarian.
You're saying that you would live in the city that relied on the torture of the child.
Yeah, this is the age-old train track analogy, isn't it? Like how many people would have to stand on the other track until you divert the train to kill one child.
Yeah, I
And
mean it's
and if it's a whole city, I think most people answer, "Well, sorry, we're gonna have to divert this train."
well maybe, but I'm not sure I'm with you actually, and I've got actually a tattoo on my arm of like carrying the child out. Just because I think, what do I think? Well, I recently read another Ursula Le Guin book, which is called "The Dispossessed," about this fictional anarchist society, and there's a line in it about how process is everything. And basically, how you do things is the important thing, not the end result. And so I'm not sure I would agree. I agree with you actually. I think I like to think that I would walk away. I like to think that I have in my own life in different scenarios. But then there's inevitable. There are several questions that come after that, such as what happens next, right? Like, so you walk away from the city. Where do you
Wait.
go?
So, do the people also have the option to abandon the utopia and save the child? I thought the two choices were everyone in misery or
No,
one child in
no.
misery. There is the option of going to seek a third thing of relatively comfortable, problematic, normal life somewhere. Then, sure, I guess you'd try to save the child.
Well, I think. I mean, yeah. So, well, it's not defined in her story, basically. But Le Guin, I think, suggests when the people are leaving, they're leaving. They're leaving because they can't live in such injustice. But they're not. They're not leaving with the child. The child stays, and is maybe doomed to stay. And actually, I think she says in her story, getting breaking the child out would almost be hopeless because they have been imprisoned so long, they're likely to be incapable of adapting to the real world. But her story has spawned lots of follow-up literature, and so there are other short stories written in response, such as "The Ones Who Stay and Fight." Ooh, I can't remember what the oh, there's one called "Why Don't We Just Kill the Kid in the Hole," and a few more anyway. And so this novella was written in a similar vein.
Yeah. So yours, yeah, just to remind everyone, it's in the show notes. We'll put links to Amazon. The Ones Who Build Something Better. So now that you've told me what it's inspired by, now it makes a lot of sense. To be honest, it made a lot of sense as a standalone work as well. You don't necessarily need to go read the inspiration to it.
Mm.
It starts with this, like, you kind of drop us into the story midway through because we don't need to know exactly what happened and what life was like. There's no like 600 page maybe Russian style description of first of the society that was before, and then you have to survive those 600 pages to get to the point which is this trial and this like new society that is being built. So you drop us right in the middle of the story. Why did you make that choice?
Well, I didn't to begin with. I mean, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of writing that was cut out, and I actually redid the opening a few days before print. But don't worry, there is a 600-page prequel coming. Uh, but I felt like, I mean, basically what you're saying, you didn't need to know how miserable this fictional city called Rengor is. Well, for the story anyway, it was enough to know that it was a bad place and people had fled it, which is the beginning of the story.
Yeah. And then they escape over this like metaphorical barrier, which is a great river. And once you cross it and it's dangerous and so forth, you escape, almost like North Korea, I suppose, how they escaped to China. And then they all have various visions. They built a few communities outside, the escapees. And you're focusing on one, the one that is like the most utopian.
Mm. Kropotkin.
I'll give you a couple of more big things that came to mind here when we enter this like trial. So basically, there's a trial of a person who's also escaped herself now, but who was married to the, let's just simplify things and call it the evil dictator in the
Mm.
bad city. And we arrive at this new attempt to build a more utopian option. And then the way they describe the importance of the trial and sort of it becomes an exploration of what human beings think they would be capable of themselves in the same situation, empathy, all these themes,
Mm.
but also the sort of collective history of the people and the importance of that. These are all big themes that you start thinking about. And it's only 38 pages, but I went through all of this in my mind. And do you know what maybe also, what I thought about the most
What?
was the Eichmann trial,
Oh, really?
Adolf
Okay.
Eichmann.
Yeah.
It's similar. Obviously real historical events, and this is a work of fiction, but the same way, like you watched a society deal with a past that had been people had shut up about it. It was not talked about. It was not. They were a bit ashamed of it in the new place. The new utopia. That was all left behind. But then they had this like actual face of evil, who in a trial gets to take the stand and speak their mind as well. So that reminded me a little bit about the Eichmann trial.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, as I'll just say for anyone listening, so yeah, I mean, as Danny has said, these people escape, they set up a new community. The wife of the sort of dictator of the old city flees and tries to join the new community, and they have a trial to determine whether she should be allowed in or not. And I mean, you're right. It is about, I mean, there are like topic concepts of forgiveness and reconciliation and so on are present. I would also say, I think it's actually, a lot more common than we like to think. And I don't think it's unusual. Like people do horrific stuff, and it's not unusual if you've been a victim of that to not want to dwell on it. But often we have to work out how to deal with people who've done this stuff. That's especially the case, when our justice systems are sort of underfunded and not very reliable. It sort of does sort of become a sort of de facto community decision about how to behave, basically, which is part of what this story explores.
Yeah. Like a difficult question is here also like in the end they are debating. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but the people are basically debating over whether this person who was part of the evil regime and did some horrific things, it's then a collective decision, a vote, whether to let them back in. So I guess in that sense, it's a bit different from something like Eichmann or South Africa or Nuremberg trials, where it was in the end a sort of professional decision by judges of the new regime what should happen. there wasn't a referendum over everything.
Well, kind of, but I mean, ultimately, like whatever institutions we have in our society to administer justice, they only exist because of the willingness of the citizenry to support them, you know? I reckon if our institutions of justice fail, then we set up our own ad hoc systems, which is where we've got things like Me Too, for example. I would say like sex crime trials in general and the sex crime like justice system basically doesn't work in the UK and a lot of other countries. And so we use a sort of form of like public shaming to administer a justice that like we can't get through the official channels. And so with like with the South African system, with Truth and Reconciliation, or the Eichmann system in Israel, like those are the systems that are set up in those places. But ultimately, our government systems are representative of what we citizens are willing to accept, basically, I reckon.
Well, yeah, to a certain extent, but like I don't know. A sharp example would be, I guess, the returns of the people who left to go to the Islamic State. Loads of
Mm,
governments in Europe have returned, kind of hush hush, but it's still public information. It's not. They didn't advertise it a lot, but they've let lots of people return, and we
mm.
don't know whether they were involved in any atrocities, but they were certainly chose to join a society that very much has been involved in terrible things. And if there was a referendum, a community vote, I don't know what towns and villages they were all returned to, but if that town voted, do you think there'd be any chance they would be have been allowed to return?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I suppose, and I think that's part of what this story explores is that once you actually get to know the history of the perpetrator, you begin to understand that kind of like a villain is just someone whose story you haven't heard yet, right? And so, I mean, you talk about these ISIS people, but a lot of the people who were allowed to return were the women, right? A lot of the men were held, and some are still being held in prison camps in the Middle East. And it was a lot of the women, some of whom had been trafficked or groomed, or exploited in some way, who were allowed to return because it was easier for us to conceptualize them as victims. And so, if you ask me, like,
Yeah, which is
would
totally sexist, by the way. Like the to not give the women any agency in evil things is totally sexist. Like they could be the ones that were driving the ideology in the family, for all we know.
that is true, although in ISIS in particular, it was quite a misogynistic society. I mean, I don't really know a huge amount about it. But I mean, obviously, the case that or anyone I reckon in the UK is most familiar with is the Shamima Begum case, right? So like the 15-year-old who was recruited online, was in ISIS for like the fall of Raqqa, but then like tried to come back and wasn't allowed and had her citizenship stripped of her. But I reckon, I mean, I might be wrong, but I reckon more societies than you might think would be willing to consider having, yeah, an ex-ISIS member, especially if they understood, if it was clear that they had been sort of coerced in some way, especially if they were young, into their community. I don't think it's out of the question.
Mm. Yeah, and I think there's a reason for why these big topical points like what have I mentioned? Compared your work so far to Solzhenitsyn and Eichmann and ISIS, and brought up all these things. South Africa. I think it has to do with because full disclosure, we went to university together, and I think because I remember you from then, when I was reading it, I heard the voice of the young man from then, and it's been a decade. So
Mm,
therefore, other readers and you yourself might read totally different things into it. Whereas I went instantly into the mind space of when we were learning about all this stuff together at the same time. You see what I mean?
mm. Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, I mean, that's the case with any fiction, right? You like put your own stamp on it when you're reading it, which I think is for the best, right? I mean, this is a whole like death of the author stuff, right? I mean, I think as well, like part of the story is that it's inconclusive, right? I mean, I don't want to say what happens, buy the book and read it, but I would say that it's not clear if they've made the right decision ultimately. And what I hope anyway is that you finish reading and you can see both sides. Like it's not a black and white decision.
Yeah, which is exactly what, I mean, those women and children from those camps in Syria, for example, it's obviously, it's pretty much exactly the same decision that we would have made, but nobody asked us. So I guess there's the difference. Because it's a small communal, utopia is the wrong word because they're a bit more realistic that when they're building this new society than Thomas More. But because it's such a small sort of community, it's a kibbutz basically. Let's let's call it what it is. Even with the communal raising of children and everything, like it's so small that I guess a referendum on every issue is just possible. It's more like a Swiss village, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, I think that you're right. Like, yeah, these like the principles that govern these communities. I mean, they're named after anarchist thinkers, right? And the principles that govern these communities, I reckon, are probably easier to adopt on a sort of smaller scale. But then at the same time, I reckon it makes admittance more complicated and something you have to think about more because it's such a small scale. If you admit the wrong people or you let the wrong people in, it can very quickly be corrupted, right?
Yeah, and do you know like what's happened with a lot of well, they don't really exist in that way in that many places, but Israel, Cuba, some South American countries have sort of communal farms or communal that then have, I don't know, they've then since then sort of branched and diversified into communal farms that used to do agriculture, but there's way more money in tech, so they've actually sent their people into to do engineering degrees, and they might have come up with tech innovations that they're selling, and what's had happened to some of them is they've not corrupted internally, like they might still live socialistically and have referendums on every issue, but to the outside, they've become gated communities. They've become wealthier than the outside world, and they, within the broader economy, I guess some like the radical left would argue they've become the oppressor.
Yeah, I mean, and that I reckon is like a really important theme of this novella, where ultimately you've got people who were victims, right? Who have fled, they've tried to build something better, but there's always the fear, and it's talked about in the book, and I hope that you're left considering it, the fear of becoming the oppressor too. And I think anyone who has really been a victim in their life struggles with the deep fear of being the perpetrator too, right? So this sort of victim victimizer are sort of two sides of the same coin. And so this community that they're building, like they kind of talk about it in that like they're just trying to do the best they can. They don't really know what they're doing, right? They're just trying to do something better than what they've come from Rengor. That's kind of, I mean, it's meant to be sort of inherent in the title. Like the ones who build something better, it's it could be true or it could be, a sort of sarcastic like remark on people on these people who maybe it's they're delusionally hoping that they can build something better. And again, that's left for you to decide.
They could be inadvertently creating like a politburo of a medium-sized Soviet city, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Because very few people wanna build a tyrannical society. the worst evil comes from people who think they're doing good, which is, why you always need to be suspicious of anyone anyone who is, too overtly good, or trying to be.
Can I probe personality wise or your own growth as a human? You've named these places after anarchist thinkers, but then you're saying some very balanced stuff like you should be wary of revolutionary ideology, or
Mm.
that is a main message, of course, one of the themes of the book. Is that a journey you went on yourself in the last decade where you were quite revolutionary and then maybe moderated?
Um, no, not necessarily. And if anything, I've become more left wing, I would say. However, I definitely have experience of leaving a sort of tyrannical system, I guess. I mean, this one was, more tied to religion, but it's all the same stuff, it's all control, and dominance and coercion. I would say part of leaving that system, restarting a lot of my life, I would say, is sort of partly reflected in this book and in this like trial and error struggle, because it's one thing to escape, which is, not easy, but then like rebuilding is difficult and is confusing. There's rarely sort of a roadmap. But I do think that sort of anarchist theory lends itself quite well to anyone who has sort of been in a similar situation or has been raised by sort of quite coercive parents, because of the focus on sort of individual sovereignty within the ideology.
Yeah. Well, it's a little similar for me, I guess. I mean, I had a disciplinarian, not a bad childhood by any means, but just disciplinarian, which maybe then drove me towards more, not always revolutionary, just I always had to have my own mind, distrust of authority, and ideologies that maybe as a proper thinking adult I may have abandoned some of them and so forth. But when you're saying like escaping a certain situation, now my cat's on the keyboard. That doesn't help anyone, does it? Yeah, but escaping like some kind of situation, then often you might also go like real rebellious, and that would include like some of these revolutionary ideologies often, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think so. They did a study of people who they were trying to work out what motivated anti-vaxxers during COVID. And they found that the higher your ACE score, so this is adverse childhood experience score, the more likely you were to be an anti-vaxxer. And basically, I think what this was demonstrating was like basically the worse your childhood was, the less willing you were to trust a sort of new vaccine that was being proposed by your like governing authority. And so yeah, I do think if your first experience of authority is of parents who are abusing it in some way, and I mean like this can go all the way from just like like having an affair to like, I don't know, like burning down your house or whatever. But if you've got parents who you detect as a child are not honest figures, then I do think that sets you on a path to be less trusting of authority, basically. So yeah, I definitely think the two are linked for sure.
Yeah. But so now you said you're still skewing left and you're still skewing towards saving the child in that hypothetical scenario we talked about in your own novella here. Would you have admitted the evil person or formerly evil trying to reform person? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I reckon I'm sort of once bitten, twice shy, basically. So personally, no. Now, in my age, grand old age of 34, I would not admit that person, the the villain who has who was married to the dictator. But in the past, I have, you know, and I definitely learned my lesson with that. But I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think you kind of have to judge on your own. And I think that's what makes the question so complicated. Some people really do change, and some people are basically incapable of it. And you never quite know how much to sort of extend your empathy. We all hope that empathy would be extended to us if we were in a similar situation. And there's definitely stuff that I sort of I can look back on things and hope that empathy would be extended. There's not a right answer, but yeah, that's my answer now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting and it's so weird. Of course, all the examples, everything I come to think of with these philosophical big questions, it's all political as well, because it's kind of a work of political philosophy, I suppose.
Mm.
You know, Plato and all that comes to mind as well to some extent. Now I'm really buttering you up here with the with the comparison, but because I don't know, let's take immigration for example. Like context matters so much. Right now, I'm convinced that there are people who skew towards shutting the borders versus helping people who are on the sea in a dinghy needing dry land and help. And like those impulses exist in most decent people, but in the context of I guess the world has gone increasingly towards war and conflict in the past few years. In that context, you totally understand that now there will be a lot of excluders if we make two categories, or welcoming or banishing. So there will be more banishers than welcomers right now. But you ask those same people when they get a calmer context in their lives and in the politics that surround their lives, they might say, no, no, absolutely, I want to go to the beach and welcome and help all these people who are in the dinghies. See what I mean?
I do, yeah. The thing is, I just don't think it's as binary in that. Okay, look. So if we've got this idea of like banishers and excluders, fine, which is I would say quite black and white, right? But I reckon like nobody, very few people would welcome completely unchecked immigration if the numbers went up from I think it's like 40,000 at the moment come over in dinghies. But let's imagine that it was 40 million coming over every year, which is like obviously it's an insane figure. But let's just imagine. I don't think anyone would say, "Oh, okay, that's fine. I still think we should accept everyone." Right? So we're all banishers at some point. At some point, we all say, "No, this is not appropriate anymore."
Yeah.
It's just we just have different limits, right?
Yeah, in your book, I suppose in your book, it would be not only the wife slash mother from that dictatorial family, but what if they all came
Well,
over
that's the thing.
over the river?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, you've got the wife of the dictator who comes over, who's sort of asking for forgiveness, and you can hear in her story about how I mean, she's basically been sort of slowly manipulated into cooperating and partaking in the abuse. But yeah, I mean, what happens if the dictator themselves and some of their accomplices come over who have been sort of more directly responsible for this terror? Like, where are the limits of your compassion? If let's say you would accept the mother or the wife, whatever, do you accept the men too? Like radical empathy is fine, but radical empathy without boundaries is just suicidal, which is kind of like the point of this story is to sort of explore those limits.
Hmm. Yeah, the two categories are not, it's not binary. What I would call is there's a lot of people who are what I'd call banishers, but as in I'd like to exclude and not let in people, but I have empathy for their plight and we should help them. Meaning, it's basically NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard, but in principle, that's fine. And I think, honestly, I think at our advanced age of mid 30s, it starts to be the majority are those, because you start to deal for the first time with things like property ownership, children, and then you kind of skew more conservative in that sense just because it's within your interest. See what I mean?
Maybe. I suppose it depends where you get your value and interests, where your interests and values are, you know? But I mean, yeah, that is the stereotype, right? That if you don't vote for the left in your 20s, you have no heart, and if you don't vote for the right in your 40s, you have no brain.
Yeah, but that's also simplified. I meant that you still don't abandon your values, even if your values are, let's say, even if you are very much on the left, you don't even stop voting for them. You don't change teams in that sense.
Mm,
But what you start noticing about yourself in daily decisions, and in just, and then slowly also in your philosophy and in your values,
mm,
is that you've definitely, I'm not saying you've become conservative with a big C, like the name of the party on the right.
mm.
I'm saying you've become more conservative with a small c about just daily decisions. You drive slower as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure there's something. There's probably yeah. I'm sure there's something to that. I suppose yeah. You're just sort of less like able to sort of try and save the world, right? And you got to focus on your own little life, as it were.
Yeah. Well, I can give you a fully fledged example. It's easy to give examples of my own thinking because that's the one I know the best. For example, with the immigration, I'm quite near the coast where where people are landing. I think both are true. I certainly am not naive. If you know my personal history, the dangers of certain ideologies that come from some parts of the world,
Mm,
I'm not naive to them, and I've met them before face to face. It's not it can be pretty ugly, and that's obviously a no in my lovely English village. But then, if there are people in the sea, first of all, if you've ever been on a boat and you look at the ocean, you should help anyone who's in a bad situation out on the seas. Like that's just the human thing to do. And once you've helped them and then they arrive, I think no matter how much I said that, yeah, I mean, we don't really have the vetting processes for these people and there seems to be too many of them and blah, blah, blah. Once they're here, I think someone should, in fluent Arabic with the right dialect, go welcome them and give them a hug and explain to them that Waitrose is way too expensive and go shop at Aldi and Lidl instead. You know what I mean? Like, you better be making friends, otherwise you're making enemies from the get-go. So I don't like that's all my point is that even if you all your ethics and morals are someone of of someone who respects other cultures and languages and wants to include and wants to have a really diverse society and wants to have all the perspectives of the world and eat all the foods except British and Finnish food, obviously, because they're disgusting. But even then, once you own your own house and you have a certain lifestyle setup, you're gonna be an excluder and a banisher when it really when the shit hits the fan, you know, and when it's your stuff on the line.
Well, I mean, so like I would say part of the story as well is to like really like dig in because we're not talking about refugees who might be in a desperate position but who ultimately we don't know. Like the people in this story, we're talking about a mother, right? And their children. You know, that's the hardest decision of all, ultimately. When it's family, do you exclude or not? You know, I still think it's a very pertinent example, especially anyone who's grown up in a dysfunctional or abusive family. But it's not an easy decision.
But also, I mean, it's about the family for the people who are testifying in your trial and the main characters, I suppose, in the story. That's also a family issue, and there's that whole drama, which I've talked about very little because clearly my mind while reading went to all this big stuff instead. Other people who read it will focus very much more on the family angle. My point is that in the end, there's a referendum, so the decision isn't being made by the family, regardless of which side of that you land on, that doesn't really matter. It's all the strangers who weren't in the room who are doing the voting,
Mm.
and which it may be one day will be with immigration as well in Britain. There may be a referendum.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah, that's true. I mean, in this story, the community is in some ways a sort of new family, a found family that has emerged as a result of the sort of destruction of the original. It obviously is less. I mean, the larger the scale, the less personal it becomes, basically, right?
Yeah, of course. When if we go to the family for a moment, that angle is that this mother had also physically abused and all like horrifically, of course, also emotionally tortured these children. And there, I guess the forgiveness for most of us reading this would be that there's no chance. Like you should never. And I believe you did maybe comment on how the children voted as well, possibly, or were planning to vote. But on the family angle, though, now, like when it's that personal, there's no chance. We're telling abused women that you should get rid of these people in your lives, right? So we shouldn't. Surely forgiveness is not the route there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one. I think everyone's going to have their own perspective on this. I also think that you can forgive people and not let them into your life, right? Which I think is touched on in this book as well. I think ultimately, like carrying a resentment long term is quite destructive to yourself, to anyone, like really like hating someone long term does very little good to people, very little good for you. But at the same time, then like forgiveness does not also mean this person has the right to be back in my life, right? Um, well, really, it's something that we probably all have to accept, right? I mean, I think most people in their lives have done shit that they wish they hadn't done and probably wronged someone in some way that they wish they hadn't done, whether it's an ex or like a coworker or whatever it is. They might forgive you, they might not, but I like part of this story then is like exploring like divorcing the idea of like forgiveness and like contact, right? Which don't have to go together.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, the kids in this scenario would save their mother from drowning in that river, or call it the English Channel, whatever. They would save them from drowning, but they wouldn't need to open their doors to their homes, right? There's a separator there.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's it. I mean, everyone's going to have different boundaries, you know, and there is no right answer. And I know it's a tough one. I was watching the documentary on the BTK killer yesterday. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Of course I do.
Right, sorry, one of your.
What serial killer don't we all know? Jesus, we all know every serial killer in the world, don't we
Sorry,
nowadays?
yeah, one of your personal heroes. Um,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, my works of political philosophy are inspired by Ted Kaczynski and whatever the BTK guy's name was. I know he was in Kansas. I don't remember what his name
yeah, I
was though.
don't either. Wait, no, I do. I watched it yesterday. Dennis Rader was his name.
Dennis Rader is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, well, unlike Ted Kaczynski, I would say he didn't really have a philosophy. He was more just, well, just killing people, basically. But what the documentary focused on was his daughter, right? And his daughter is still alive. Well, he's still alive in prison. And his daughter was talking about how the daughter's mother can and maybe did just divorce this man and like try to move on, I guess, right? But because she is the daughter, she always has this man's blood in her veins. Like she can't just like divorce and move on. She even like looks quite like him. A really interesting account from her basically about how she sort of tried to come to terms with it. And I think she visited him in prison, and then eventually just like couldn't deal with it. But what was also interesting was that she stayed. The people who were close to her were the people who knew her before he was arrested. And so the people who knew her for her. And that's like another like angle that we haven't really talked about yet about how if you if you do go through something like this, it's not just, I would say, like forgiveness that you've got to think about and like access and boundaries and so on, but it's also like identity, and like who am I outside of this like horrendous stuff that I've endured. And yeah, I mean it's not hugely touched on. It is a bit, but I would say like part of the community building then, it's not just a group community building, it's also like identity building for people who have escaped, who have made it to the community. And yeah, it's not an easy one to carry.
That's a really interesting point, and it fantastically opens the door for shitting on internet and social media again.
Okay.
Is what you said? This we have been telling people who have gone through trauma and terrible things that were outside their control that you are more than what happened to you. That's something that happened to you, but you as a person are something else. Like build from whatever you like doing. Is it painting or is it golf? Start there. Maybe you're a painter and a golfer rather than the person who got X, Y, and Z done to them when they were kids or whatever. We've been telling that to people for years. But now it feels like whenever the only way to sort of, for a lot of people, or the way they choose to deal with trauma is to speak out and put a camera in their face. And then their entire identity on the internet, at least, becomes what happened to them. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So all these inspirational talks by people who had terrible, who went through something terrible, now they're doing the opposite of what we're meant to be doing when we recover from
Well,
trauma.
I don't know if there's a meant to be doing or not, but I do think asserting your agency and taking power back is really important in the trauma, whatever trauma it is. I also think that sometimes what you've been through is so extreme that the only thing you can do is to embrace it. So I'm thinking specifically of Monica Lewinsky.
I have a better one for you. At the end of the day, they had some sex, and then she got really badly treated in the press. I know that, but what about Natasha Kampusch? You know, that girl from that basement.
I don't know who that is, sorry.
Oh, she's the one, and she's the one who was held by that guy in a basement, and then uh, like had children with him, and then he held the children in the basement too, and did
Is
awful
that
things to
is
all of
that the
them.
Austrian oh,
Well, yeah, because there were two cases really close by. There was Fritzl, Joseph Fritzl
yeah.
was one of the freaks,
Okay.
but his victim was called Elizabeth, I think.
Okay.
And that, but then there was another one called was his name Joseph Pricklopil, I think, and he kept this Natasha woman in the basement and had a family with her there.
Right, okay.
So that,
I don't
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know about the second one. I remember the Fritzl
Well,
case. Um,
yeah. Well, Natasha's anyway. She's like claimed ownership of what happened to her and become like as basically her identity is what happened to her. I guess as an example here. But yeah. Anyway, go ahead with Lewinsky. I think that's a that's a more positive example and a sort of.
well, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Monica Lewinsky, where, I mean, I think she became an anti-bullying advocate, but she had sort of made a rationale or made a decision basically that, like, it was almost like she'd already lived the first line of her obituary, right? And so she might as well sort of embrace it because it was so life-defining. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard, I think everyone has their own responses. I mean, some people don't say anything, and I just finished a master's last year. The dissertation that I wrote was on prosecuting perpetrators of child sexual abuse, and a lot of people who've suffered from child sexual abuse just don't say anything for the rest of their lives. I can't remember what the stats are, but an alarming number of people will say nothing forever, because they don't wanna. Well, I mean, there are lots of reasons why, but one of the reasons why is they don't want to be the victim again. And uh, what am I trying to say? I don't know. Like, people respond to this. People respond to like severe stuff differently, I guess. And I don't think what works for some people isn't going to work for others.
Yeah, the Natasha Campus girl, by the way, just double check that so we don't give any false information. Wolfgang Pricklopil was the prick who held her in a basement.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, yeah, yeah, but yeah, Lewinsky and her, they became to inspiring people, and yeah, I guess one way is to just take ownership. There must be a scale of like how bad is the thing that happens to you. Obviously, there's no objective scale, but let's say you had a 10 out of 10 trauma in your life based on your own scale in your mind.
Mm.
Then maybe the only way to do it is to let it define you, but own it. And then if you're more of a 6 or 7, then what you should do is try to not let it define you.
Well,
You know?
well, maybe, but then at the same time, I think like there's lots of different ways of like owning it, as it were, right? So like, I mean, we're talking about like literature and writing. So if you were to talk about like something like writing a memoir, right, which like lots of people do, um, but then there are also lots of other ways of like writing a story that's not sort of super personal and like graphic and visceral, right? And so there are lots of stories that we're very familiar with that are of like good triumphing over evil in some way, right? Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, you know? All well, I don't know about George Lucas's motivations, but J.K. Rowling obviously went through a bunch of trauma herself, which she's talked about. And Lord of the Rings is heavily inspired by like by like the Christian resurrection story and everything. And J.R. Tolkien was a Christian. C.S. Lewis, who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, was also a Christian, and that's meant to be a Christian allegory.
J.R.R. Tolkien was probably severely traumatized by walking. He was in the First World War, right?
Was it?
That's why now I get it. Those unreadable, unwatchable, awful things about people walking. Now I get it. It's all that humping he had to do in the war, you know?
I mean, yeah, I don't want to speculate. Um, but like yeah, like there's lots of different ways of letting it out, right? Is basically what I'm saying. This sort of our generation definitely sort of focuses on like talking things out, right? And like letting it out in a sort of cathartic way. But it's got to be better than like keeping it in.
Can I tell you my favorite quote from your book?
Yeah, please. Yeah, yeah.
I have a feeling that it's been said before somewhere, but the best quotes always you do feel like it's not original, even if it is, because it feels like something so obvious that it should have always been there. But there's this one guy who says, when they're debating the voting, whether to allow this woman in or not, he says, what did he say? The solution to radical hate is not radical love, it's discernment.
Mm,
I love that.
mm.
Where did you get that?
That's. I think I got that from me. I hope I haven't like subconsciously like plagiarized it or anything. But at the same time, I think. I mean, I'm sure I've like listened to lectures or podcasts that have basically made the same point. But I think it is right, and like I think in many ways that touches to like the very heart of the book, right? Which is that I think it's very common if you've gone through radical hate to worry so much about letting that sort of define you that you pivot the other way and go towards radical love, right? And I know I can think of lots of people who've done that, and like sure, yeah, it is like a lot better. But then at the same time, if that is how you are sort of carrying yourself, it can be dangerous, right? You can be the target of sort of predatory bad people. Ultimately, like you will either learn discernment or you will like continue to suffer. Like discernment is learned after you've suffered long enough, basically, I reckon. And what I sometimes said, the people with the strongest boundaries are the people who didn't have any to begin with. Oh, no, that doesn't work. It's something like that, right? It's like the people with the strongest boundaries are the people who've had to learn how to have the strongest boundaries, basically.
Yeah. That quote already summarized it. You don't have to try to rewrite it. It's perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
The solution to radical hate is not radical love, it's discernment. I love it because discernment is also such a dry British word. You know, it really gave me satisfaction to say it in my mind.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Sir, sir, it is discernment, sir. That kind of, you know, gave me joy.
Okay.
Hey, for the end here, can I ask you about the reception to this? Have people been generally, I don't know, as haughty as I have been that, you know, talked about big themes with you afterwards, or what have people said?
That's a good point, actually. I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, it only came out 6 days ago. So, I mean, I've had a few people who have like read it and liked it, but to be honest, I haven't got enough feed. I haven't got a huge amount of feedback yet. So if anyone is listening to this and wants to like write a review on Amazon, then please do because I would love to. I would love to hear more about it outside of people from my own circle. I think it's going to be a little bit of a slow burn in terms of like selling copies and hearing feedback. So I will let you know.
Yeah, but it's also a forever. It's not a topical thing. I mean, I may have made it topical here, but it's what's it called? Evergreen piece of work that will be thought provoking for generations to come.
Well, hopefully, yeah. I mean, hopefully it stands up. It's not like fixed to a particular place in time. But that doesn't mean that I'm not, keeping an eye on the Amazon and Goodreads page to see if people have left reviews yet. Um,
Yeah.
so I will keep you up to date with that.
Well, yeah, and everyone go find William Jennings Chalk, The Ones Who Build Something Better. It's a fantastic short read. You can do it in one evening. Particularly poor toilet session. You'll need a bad tummy, but you can do it in one sitting. And or a day at the beach. It takes you longer to figure out what happened in your head than it does to actually finish the thing. So it's a great work. What's next, by the way? Well, will it be published on the same Amazon author page? What's coming next?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm actually working on a novel, and then, well, I will write the novel first. I'm writing a prequel, set in the same world, but set, 50 years beforehand. And I'm gonna write that and then maybe go digging around for like an agent or something like that and see what I can find. I'm quite new to this writing as a career game, but it seems like that's the next step. So yeah, just gonna get my head down and get a first draft and then see what I can see basically.
And with the agent thing, I think a novella was the right move, right? You have something really snappy and quick. It's a portfolio that you can show off.
That's basically what I've been doing this year. And just publishing a few short stories and yeah, with this novella and so on. And then we go from there. So yeah, I mean, let's here's hoping basically.
Hey, thank you so much for your time. Fantastic read this was, and awesome chat. And when the next one comes out, let us know, and we'll talk about that one next.
Thanks a lot for having me, Danny. It's been great to catch up.
Now, if you enjoyed this episode of The Talking Ass, remember to rate, review, follow the show for more of this weirdness, and share it with a friend, enemy, neighbor, relative, lover even. And press those goddamn internet buttons. Press them hard. Follow, all that jazz. See you next time.